Let's get into it. Today's top story coming out of the Washington Post, which is reporting the NFL may allow teams themselves to create their own policies in terms of protests during the national anthem. So, some sort of analogy here. In a sense, the federal government would give power to the states to decide this topic here. You know, with the federal government leaving policies of marijuana, for example, to the states, the NFL could perhaps let the power into the team's hands, and then they would decide whether or not they would require standing or kneeling during the national anthem, or I guess allow kneeling would be the latter option there. So as we stand right now, there is no legislation from the NFL, from teams, or anything of the sort that states that players are required to stand during the national anthem, right? So players can kneel right now and perhaps be surfaced to, you know, perhaps, I guess, some sort of punishment for the teams or anything like that. But nothing from the NFL, no suspensions, no fines, no anything like that. So there's nothing written in stone here about this topic. So I think putting the power on the teams would probably make matters worse, in a sense. You got to think about it. What if one team has a policy that players should stand during the national anthem, and another team has a policy that says, well, do what you want, and that team that allows the players to do what they want travels to the team that requires the standing? It just creates this muddiness here where I think it should be avoided. Just too many variables, and I think things could get ugly if that were the case. Now, the Washington Post is also reporting that the NFL could decide from anywhere from straight up requiring standing from all the players in the NFL to straight up saying you can do whatever you want. So the NFL could perhaps have its own legislation. It's not just about the teams, perhaps. So there's different avenues here that could go on. This will be a topic of discussion during the owners' meetings in Atlanta later this month. So different pathways that we could go about this. Where do you all stand on the national anthem debate? Should players be required to stand during the 2018 NFL season and then beyond? Hit me up in the comments section. This is a topic that will continue to be discussed throughout the summer because the owners themselves and the NFL itself is discussing it. So there's resistance on both sides of the aisle here. There's the camp that believes that players should be able to do what they want, a la Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem and Alejandro Villanueva, you know, coming out of the locker room and standing. You know, there are policies, or I guess thought processes, that say players should be able to do what they want. Now, there's the other, you know, realm of this that's essentially in favor of requiring players to stand during the national anthem. There are the people that believe that because these players are employees of the NFL, they should listen to their employer in the sense that they should stand during the national anthem. Because I will say this, there is in the policy, or at least in the legislation, that says players are strongly encouraged to stand during the anthem. So obviously not required, but strongly encouraged. Dwayne chiming in here on the Cam Rogers Show, episode 100, saying, this isn't a dictatorship nor a government. It's entertainment, and the players should do as they please during the national anthem and concerning it. Appreciate the comment there, Dwayne. I think a lot of people are into the camp that you sit in right now. You know, there's this debate here about the First Amendment rights, but also the debate of following along with what your boss wants, right? You know, I've drawn the comparison before. An accountant working for somebody at a firm or something like that, and the boss says that they can't kneel during the national anthem. You know, let's say they play the national anthem during work every morning. You can't kneel during that. What are you going to do? Kneel anyway? You're going to be fired. You're going to be looking for a new job. You're going to be on Indeed.com looking for openings. So a lot of people use that same kind of thought process here with the players, in that because they are working for the NFL, they should listen to what the legislation currently says, and it says that they are strongly encouraged to stand. I'm not saying that's my position. You guys know my position on this topic. I personally feel that the players should do with what they please. Now, when you have players filing grievance cases against the NFL and saying that the NFL owners are colluding against me and all this stuff, talking about Kaepernick and Eric Reid, you're hard-pressed to really say that they're going to be employed pretty darn soon in the NFL because, well, if you're suing your employer, why would they hire you? Thomas chiming in on Facebook Live here. When you're on the clock, you will have to abide by certain things. Whatever your boss decides, that is you have to abide by or don't work there. Same thing for the NFL. So Thomas is kind of talking about what I was discussing with this analogy here where you're working for your employer. If your employer wants you to stand or it's highly encouraged to stand during the national anthem, you should do so. So Roger Goodell is going to have his hands full, ladies and gentlemen. He'll be working on this topic with all the NFL owners right now, but let me say this. The wrong solution would be to let the teams create this policy, because I'm telling you, it's going to get messy. You're better off doing just some blanket legislation, whether it is standing or letting the players do with what they please. At the end of the day, and I think the sad thing about this topic is that I don't think we will ever have 100% happiness among all the sides. If we do come to some sort of compromise, there's going to be still some resistance on both areas of the aisle here. And it's sad, and I think it's going to continue to be a topic of discussion out there. And Colin Kaepernick, of course, was recently in discussions with the Seattle Seahawks. There was the report that Kaepernick was going to go work out for Seattle, that Seattle asked him about his plans for kneeling in 2018, and he said he may not, he really doesn't have a plan, and the Seahawks canceled the workout there. So, I mean, this is obviously going to be a very real topic as we go forward, and the NFL Players Association is right in the middle of all this as well, really keeping tabs. And, of course, they're in the players' corner saying that the players have the right to kneel during the national anthem because there is no legislation that requires it to do so. So this is a developing story here. There are a lot of variables to this. It's a fluid situation, no doubt about it. But the owners are going to meet in Atlanta later this month to perhaps hammer down some sort of legislation, whether it's an NFL blanket policy that says players are required to stand, whether it's a blanket policy that says players can do whatever they want, or the NFL delegates the powers to the teams to create their own policies. And, of course, just like how, topics in the United States are very controversial, such as marijuana and abortion, all this stuff, those are policies that are left to the states. They're still very controversial, right? Could be the same case here if the NFL delegates the power to the teams to decide whether or not players are allowed to kneel and whether or not they are required to stand. So I really hope the NFL either just figures out some sort of blanket type of legislation here, or they just let it be. They stick with what they have right now, and they say that, you're strongly encouraged to stand during the national anthem, but you know what? If you feel that you need to deliver some sort of message, whatever the message is, and you feel like you need to kneel during the national anthem, you should do so, or you should feel free to do so. So, I mean, it's, again, a very controversial topic, of course. Just imagine Bob McNair, though, who has made some really bad comments of late, being able to implement his own policy for the Houston Texans, and just imagine not even the sheer controversy in the NFL scope, but the divides within the Houston Texans organization, because I'm betting you that there are players in that locker room for the Texans that want that freedom. Not necessarily that they would kneel, but they want that choice. All right, so there you go. Changes could be coming to the national anthem policy across the NFL. That's our top story here on the Cam Rogers Show, presented by the Game Time app. Head on to chatsports.com/tickets. Get up to 60% off all those last-minute sports tickets, concert tickets, and so much more. We thank them for sponsoring episode 100 of the Cam Rogers Show here today. By the way, guys, keep hitting me up in the comments section. I be sure to answer all of the comments and questions that flow in after the show is over, so be sure to drop me a line. All right, let's get to the next story here. Lamar Jackson has not heard from Joe Flacco, and that's according to Lamar Jackson himself. And I think this is the least surprising news of the day because Joe Flacco obviously doesn't want to give up his starting gig with the Baltimore Ravens, and he recently refused to talk to the media in regards to the recent draft that the Ravens had. So Jackson spoke with media members during rookie minicamp and said he hasn't heard a peep from the Super Bowl MVP himself, Joe Flacco. Knowing Flacco, this really does not shock me. And again, I'm not best friends with the guy, but this is what Joe does, okay? He wants security at the quarterback position. And he's not going to go out and whine or anything like that. That's not what Joe does. It's Joe cool. He keeps it chill, all right? But in terms of really figuring out his mentality at one point in time, i.e. like right now, he usually goes quiet, especially if he's mad. And that's kind of the case right now. Joe Flacco has gone quiet. He's a guy with a lot of pride. He's got a Super Bowl MVP, 12 touchdowns, no picks in that amazing run. And, you know, I'm thinking back to the 2013 campaign for Baltimore as well. So this is after the Super Bowl when Joe Flacco got paid and all that stuff. And the Ravens struggled mightily to run the football. I'm telling you, they could get no push with that offensive line with A.Q. Shipley there on the interior and Gino Gradkowski. It was a really bad offensive line that year, and Joe Flacco was running plays out of the pistol and all this, and eventually the Ravens started running the Wildcat because they were so desperate to get a run game going. And you know what happened? Joe Flacco went quiet, and you could tell he was mad. And we could be in that same situation here between Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco. Now, I will say Lamar has not heard from Robert Griffin III either, the other quarterback on the Baltimore Ravens roster. So now you're in a situation with Joe where he may have the biggest threat of his career waiting in the wing in Lamar. The Ravens traded up to get him. And it seems as though Baltimore is preparing for the post-Joe Flacco era. Whether or not I am ready, of course, is another topic for another day, but let me just say this. I'm not ready for the post-Joe Flacco era. Joe Flacco is my boy. He's the only quarterback I have known as a Baltimore Ravens fan. And I think it's time for Joe Flacco to put up or deal with the inevitable that Lamar Jackson is coming. And if Joe does not put up good numbers in 2018, I'm telling you, that clock will continue to tick and tick and tick. And, of course, if you guys read the reports of late, looks like the Ravens are preparing to utilize Lamar Jackson in some offensive packages. May not necessarily be at quarterback. Maybe it will be. Maybe in kind of like a Wildcat type of deal. But the Ravens are going to prepare to utilize Lamar. And Marty Morningweg is already going through the process with that, according to reports. So there you go. Jackson and Flacco, not exactly best friends. Yet, anyway. All right, let's get to some Seattle Seahawks news here. How about Shaquem Griffin? Looks like he may play Weakside linebacker. So he had a lot of versatility in college, and it looks like the Seahawks are kind of latching on to that. I think this is actually mostly an insurance policy for Griffin to learn this weak side here in case KJ Wright walks in free agency in 2019. Griffin's a sure tackler. You can move him around, maybe try him out at Leo, play him as a cover linebacker, box safety. You can kind of have fun with him. Kind of like Tremaine Edmunds, right? Tremaine Edmunds, you can kind of use that same mentality. Edmunds, of course, is a first rounder and has a lot higher of expectations. But I think the same kind of concept can be applied here to Griffin. So I'm honestly not sure what to think about the Seahawks right now, going through this reset, as they say. But I will say Griffin will be a vital piece to this defense. I think he'll be a good player on that squad. And you're looking at a team that added players like Barkevious Mingo and Dante Johnson. They lost Michael Bennett and Richard Sherman, of course. So some changes going on in Seattle, but Griffin could be certainly a bright spot on this team should, you know, the team around him crumble a little bit. And I don't have the highest expectations out there for Seattle in 2018. All right, let's get to some more news here, talking about Booger McFarland reportedly joining the Monday Night Football crew as a field analyst. So this is interesting. Now, I'm thinking like Tony Siragusa, Pete Schrager kind of reporting here on the sideline. So Jason Witten will reportedly be the lead analyst alongside Joe Tessitore there on ESPN. And this is actually not too surprising if you recall, and if you happen to watch the Pro Bowl, ESPN utilized Louis Riddick as a field analyst during that broadcast. Now, Riddick was part of the auditions and all this stuff and he ultimately did not get the job. Booger McFarland apparently will. Matt Hasselbeck got a few looks as well. Kurt Warner was in discussions. I'm actually shocked that Warner isn't on this Monday Night Football team. He's a great analyst, really good with his phrasing, very concise with his thoughts. So me personally, I like the field analyst. I always liked watching Tony Siragusa on the sidelines giving his reports and such, and ESPN has actually utilized a field analyst on college football broadcasts. You guys may recall seeing Todd McShay there on the field reporting for ESPN's ABC college football broadcast. So there you go, Booger McFarland going to join the Monday Night Football crew, according to reports. All right, how about this? Mike McCarthy thinks Deshone Kizer would be a first-rounder in the 2018 NFL Draft. I want Tom Downey hitting us up in the comments section right now because this is interesting. So Kizer is presumed to be the backup to Aaron Rodgers. Did not have a good rookie campaign with the Cleveland Browns, but I'm not so sure the second coming of Tom Brady would have had a good year with the Cleveland Browns last year, but I digress. McCarthy also once talked up Brett Hundley after Rodgers went down with that injury last year, so maybe this is just some sort of tactic. But to say that Kizer has similar traits to the top quarterbacks in this draft, talking about the Mayfields, the Darnolds, the Allens, the Rosens of the world, I don't know, Mike McCarthy. That one's a little bit of a stretch, my man. I mean, I know you like to talk up your players, but if Kizer wasn't a first-round pick a year ago and then didn't have a good year in 2017, what makes him a first-round pick now? And honestly, Deshone Kizer would not go in the first round in the 2018 NFL Draft. I don't even know if he'd go in the second round. Maybe in the late second round, okay? So Travis chiming in the comments section. McCarthy has lost his marbles. Travis, that's what I'm saying, man. I don't know what McCarthy is actually doing right now. Maybe trying to build up the confidence. Sometimes coaches like to speak things into existence, and perhaps McCarthy is trying to speak Deshone Kizer into a first-round caliber quarterback. I don't know if that's going to work, but time will tell. All right, let's get to some Patriots news here. So New England is loaded with running backs right now, and it looks like Mike Gillislee could be on the chopping block here. So New England signed Gillislee to a 2-year, $6.4 million contract and also sent a 5th-round pick to Buffalo to acquire him because Gillislee was an RFA. Now with Burkhead, James White, and Sony Michel, who I can't believe was drafted by New England, all locks to make the roster, it looks like Gillislee is going to battle it out with Jeremy Hill, Brandon Bolden, and Ralph Webb for that final roster spot. So Gillislee was essentially benched, you may recall, in like the second half of last year, only playing in 1 game after week 8. All right, so whatever the case, I think Gillislee will find a home eventually, whether it's still with New England or another team. But this just draws me back to the really weird draft that New England had, especially in that first round, getting Isaiah Wynn and then grabbing Sony Michel there. You already have a loaded backfield with capable carriers there, right? With Rex Burkhead and James White. Jeremy Hill, I still think, is a quality running back. I just don't think Cincinnati utilized him the right way. And Mike Gillislee is a good running back, too. It's like, why load up on all these RBs, and then you're going to cut somebody you signed just last year? And Gillislee, it just doesn't make all that much sense to me. So there you go. That's the deal with the New England Patriots there. How about this? Earl Thomas, still a no-show at team activities with the Seattle Seahawks. Thomas is obviously a vital remaining piece of that Seahawks Legion of Boom and very critical to their success for the last few years. And he knows it, by the way, because he has the leverage and he's not showing up to team activities as we stand, which are voluntary, I will say. So Earl Thomas has made noise about this before. He wants security at the position, and the more the Seahawks drag this out, because Thomas is entering the final year of his contract, I think the worse it gets for Seattle. Would Seahawks leadership really let this get to a boiling point here, where Thomas essentially says, you know what, just trade me to the Dallas Cowboys, I'm done. John Schneider cannot let that happen, because I'm telling you, the more this drags on, the more Thomas is going to request a trade to, say, the Dallas Cowboys. And the rumor is going to pick up steam yet again. So right now, these workouts are voluntary, as I said, but keep this date in mind here, June 12th. It's the start of their 3-day mandatory minicamp where Earl Thomas could be subject to a fine around $84 million if he doesn't show up. Should the Seahawks there trade Earl Thomas if tensions continue? Hit me up on Facebook Live and YouTube Live in the comments section, and of course, I'll track what you guys say. We do appreciate when you weigh in. Tell you what, it's kind of like with what's going on with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Le'Veon Bell. The more the Steelers and Colbert, the GM there, let this drag on, the worse it gets for the chemistry with Bell and Steelers leadership. Could be the same case here with Earl Thomas in Seattle. Speaking of the Steelers, Ben Roethlisberger's not going to mentor Mason Rudolph. Wow, Drama Ben back at it again, folks. So he recently made an appearance on a local sports station, and I want you guys to listen to this. Here's what he said when asked if he'll mentor Mason Rudolph. Quote, "If he asks me a question, I might just have to point to the playbook." Close quote. Oh, Ben. This is classic Ben Roethlisberger trying to stir up the headlines and all of this stuff. Talking about a guy who last year threw 5 interceptions, count them 5, against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and then after that game said, well, maybe I just don't have it anymore. We're talking about the same guy who just a week ago said, well, I want to play 3 to 5 more years. Now we're talking about a guy who says, you know, I really didn't understand the selection of Mason Rudolph as our 3rd-round pick. Usually 3rd-round picks are for winning now. Ben Roethlisberger, I'm telling you right now, you are on the decline, and the Pittsburgh Steelers know that. Your window is closing. GM Kevin Colbert is preparing for the post-Ben Roethlisberger era. Just like, you know, there's been buzz about the Giants preparing for the post-Eli Manning era. Now, if you didn't mention retirement, then maybe the Steelers wouldn't have had to draft a quarterback in that 3rd round. Roethlisberger, you were the one that talked about retirement just last year. All right, so you're a part of this equation here. And the big-time question for all of you guys, how many more years does Ben actually have left being an adequate quarterback in the NFL? Because we're starting to see some flashes of mediocrity in some of those games last year. All right, and Ben hasn't played 16 games since 2014. So you got to go back a few years for a fully healthy Roethlisberger. And even in those 16 games, you know, he wasn't 100%. Obviously, no NFL player really is, but Ben especially. Now, we'll see if Ben walks back these statements here, which I think he will, because I think Tomlin or somebody's going to talk to him and be like, dude, what are you saying? And then also, this is interesting, Mason Rudolph also said that if I was in Ben's position, I would say the same thing. So something tells me deep down Rudolph would like to learn a little bit from Ben Roethlisberger, I would think. But here you go. Drama from Ben Roethlisberger yet again. And boy, I love talking about it as a Baltimore Ravens fan. All right, let's get to the next storyline here. Todd Bowles unsure if Teddy Bridgewater will be a full go for OTAs. So Bowles was speaking to the media last Saturday at rookie minicamp and was pretty non-committal on whether Bridgewater will be a full participant in OTAs. And of course, Bridgewater made a regular season appearance for the Vikings last year against the Cincinnati Bengals. I think the Jets are probably just playing this safe right now. Now, I'm pretty sure Teddy Bridgewater wants to get out there and get some reps under his belt here because he's got a competition now against Darnold and against Josh McCown. And I've said this a few times on my program. This is going to be one of the more fun quarterback battles, I think, this offseason. Darnold, Bridgewater, and McCown. Bridgewater, the stopgap guy, the veteran, has shown adequate flashes, actually, of late. Bridgewater, the guy looking for that second chance in the NFL after that brutal injury a couple of years ago. And then Darnold. A lot of people thought he was going to go #1 overall in the 2018 NFL Draft. A lot of promise for him. He's raw, a bit of a project. And oh, by the way, there is that guy named Christian Hackenberg still on the roster. How about this, guys? Hackenberg actually changed his throwing motion while working with his personal quarterback coach this offseason, and Todd Bowles had no idea. Like, he didn't know that. That's where we're at with Christian Hackenberg. I think Todd Bowles is looking at the post-Hackenberg era, if you will, with the New York Jets, and Bryce Petty's already gone, right? So Hackenberg could be next. We'll see. All right, let's get to another headline here about the Seattle Seahawks. And Russell Wilson looks like he's going to get the franchise tag in 2020. I know it's a ways away, guys, but that's the report here from Pro Football Talk. And based on his 2019 cap number, it will cost the Seahawks $30.34 million to keep him for another season after the expiration of his current deal. So would Seahawks GM John Schneider here go year to year at that point and kick the can down the road, just like the Redskins and Kirk Cousins? That's the big-time question. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, the Seahawks go franchise tag all 3 years after the expiration of this current deal for Russell. That put him at $119.18 million for the next 3 years, which is an average salary of nearly $40 million per year. All right, so Wilson has said he wants to play until he's 45 years old. So if the Seahawks are smart about this, they would not use the franchise tag back to back to back and so on. I mean, it just wouldn't make any sense. He's turning 30 in November. He wants to play 15 more years in the NFL. I think you got to work out some sort of long-term deal. All right, so will the Seahawks make the playoffs in 2018? Hit me up in the reaction poll. Give me a heart for yes, a like for no. Be sure to expand upon that in the comment section here on Facebook Live as well as YouTube Live. One more headline to get to, folks. The Seahawks have moved on from Cliff Avril. This broke on Friday, so if you missed it during the Friday news dump, Avril is now a free agent. He failed a physical, and the Seahawks announced this officially. So 4 games into his 10th NFL season, of course, Avril suffered that brutal neck injury that could very well end his career, which is really sad to see. Carroll once said that it'd be difficult to really envision Avril playing in the NFL again, but Avril himself has said his 2018 status is still very much up in the air. He finished his Seahawks career with 41 sacks in 64 games, including the postseason there. So really a true disruptor on that front line for Seattle. Really integral part of that defense for so many years, and it looks like he is moving on, whether it is into a different work or still with the NFL. We'll see.